Hey, everybody, welcome back to the FreeMind Network Podcast. Today, we are diving deep into the food industry. What's really in our food, how consumer preferences are shifting, and those hidden forces that are shaping what it is that we eat. My guest today is Ryan McAdams. He's the owner of Honeysuckle Chocolate and Candy in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He has had a front row seat to the changing landscape of food, health, and consumer demand. From big tobacco's influence on processed foods in the 80s and 90s to why U.S. products are different from their European counterparts. This is a conversation you don't want to miss. Let's hop right in.
Ryan McAdams, owner of Honeysuckle Chocolate and Candy.
Awesome. And where are you located? You're in Tulsa, Oklahoma?
Located in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Perfect. So, Ryan, I'll open this up with letting people know, and I'll put on the post-production as well, your prior episode, which dives a little bit more into your story and things like that. For today, we're going to talk about consumer demands and the evolution of the consumer packaged goods and food industry and stuff like that. So I want people to know that this is a little bit different. Now that we're doing second episodes, we go past the life story and things like that. And now we get into the meat of what your passions and what you're doing. So I appreciate you taking the time today. And the first one is to start off with would be starting off with consumer demand and awareness. Something we talked about the last time is the consumer kind of evolving, and you're in the retail space. So you're constantly interacting with those consumers and getting that feedback. How do you feel like consumer preferences have changed with chocolate and candy specifically over the past 10 years, let's say? Let's actually even go 5 to 10 years, kind of in that range. And what major trends have you seen in terms of flavor, ingredients, and sourcing?
I think there's been a steady increase in a desire to support food made in the U.S. There's been a steady increase in a knowledge of trying to educate ourselves. People are trying to educate themselves on where their food's coming from, what's in their food. I think there's probably a lot more people looking at the back of a package now than there was 10 or 15 years ago. A lot, probably 300% more. I mean, just way more knowledge of that. And I think a lot of it is health things. I think some of it is feel like I want to support someone local. I feel like we even really have a lot more people at the counter we're interacting with that they want to know if you own the store. They want to know if the owner's there. If you're the owner, they want to know they're supporting a local business and stuff. So I think that that's caught on more and more. I think some of that awareness of knowing I'm supporting a local business came about probably in that 2020 COVID lockdown, where, it became a little more on the public mind that if we don't get out of our homes here, we're going to lose all our local businesses and stuff there too. But yeah, there's definitely been an increase in knowledge of ingredients, what's in my food. That's increased. I don't know really what percent it is now, but we see a lot more interaction and conversations at the counter with a customer in that retail setting, than we did before. I mean, noticeably, not even close.
And I think that's what a lot of people need to understand that don't necessarily stand behind the register at any retail, let's say now, that is a consumable good that people are putting in their bodies. That's across the board. It's not just in chocolate. It's not just in candy, beverage companies, breweries, wineries, distilleries. Everybody's getting that feedback. And I think one of the things is, do you see, a while ago, we used to say, and I even said it from a boardroom standpoint, is we saw that the health and wellness, it was a trend. It looked like a trend, and where it was okay, that's going to go through and it's going to change. But I think, like you said, when COVID hit, we all started looking at the trends and the data, and we realized, shit, we're not protected from anything because we're not healthy. And the balance of that being that some people went an extreme route. You know what I mean? They maybe cut sugar out of their life completely and all this other stuff. And then some people, I'll speak for myself, I went to a very balanced approach. Candy and sugar is a necessity of my daily life. Yes. And that is a deal breaker for me. It's a tool. It's an energy source. It's a comfort. And it's a stress relief for me. But what I did during COVID was I had that realization as well, where I'm consuming way too much. And then it became a moderation thing where I was okay, if I'm going to binge on some candy on a Saturday or Sunday, I got to offset my week somehow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, go ahead. If you had something on that one. Yeah.
I think you really do. I mean, I don't eat probably any less chocolate throughout a week than I did 14 years ago. But there's a whole lot of other things that I have cut out, and stuff, and for the better. And then there's things I have increased when it comes to just things like exercise and activity.
Yeah, and it's the same for me as well as with alcohol. Like we talked about this before. About 2 years ago, I cut alcohol out. I'm not a prohibitionist. I'm not anybody that believes that teetotaling and alcohol needs to not exist. Alcohol is a vital piece to all of our society. But mine was a moderation in consumption, and for me, that substance triggered an addiction inside of my body, and I had to cut it out. And I want people, as they're listening to this conversation, I want, as these kind of questions kind of keep going, I want people to realize we're talking to humans as humans. Yes. And this is not a political conversation. This is not anybody trying to lure people to go shop at their local candy store. This is a conversation where we're acknowledging that the industry is changing. This is not a fad. This is a human thing now. It's not an economical marketplace type thing. This is a foundational piece of society.
Yeah, because I don't care if you come to my store or don't come to my store. You're another human being. I personally believe that you're a child of God, and I don't want you sick. I feel bad if people are sick. I feel bad because we have a lot of those conversations in our store with customers. I don't know if they're more open with us because we are strangers and stuff, but I mean, like, people are very open with us about their health struggles, about the health struggles of their family and friends. And it pains me to know that people are struggling with things to where going to the doctor becomes a routine for them, like going to the grocery store is a routine for you or me. And that shouldn't be part of your daily, weekly life. Going to the doctor, taking a pile of pills, or having surgeries all the time, that's not normal. Like, it shouldn't be, like a second job for you. It shouldn't be what you do throughout your entire retirement. It shouldn't be that way. And those are the conversations we're having with people. And you're realizing, like, how, like you said, we realize, I think COVID is when we kind of realized, like, wow, this is not just like a anomaly of people I know that are sick. Like, we're not a very healthy society, and stuff. And it's not just a thing I'm noticing, like the stats and the data lined up, that we're not as healthy as we were 40 years ago.
And I think, like, I want to talk a little bit about the consumer trend change, but I also want to do a little historical, kind of revisit a conversation we had the other week. Was, I think more people need to understand it's not a conspiracy theory that, in the 50s, 60s, and the 70s, the tobacco industry had a lot of regulatory changes. They weren't allowed to be on movies. They weren't allowed to be on television. Mm-hmm. They weren't allowed to market to children. And what happened was, and this is all public information, they shifted their investments, and they realized they weren't going to fight the government. They weren't going to fight regulations. They weren't going to fight society. They were going to make their money in different ways. Yes. And they took that money and they invested in the cereal industry and the breakfast industry. And what I want to talk about in here is, like you just said, about the last 40 and 30 years, I'm one that I had a little piece. I don't even think I had any pieces of the original cereals and the original breakfast foods. I was born in 1985. Yeah. And I believe that I've never experienced any of that. So when people talk about the differences, I think let's talk a little bit about how the actual ingredients were different. And also to the point where I think a lot of people don't realize that these manufacturers in the United States make two different line items. Like, they make a domestic product and then they make an international product to match the health standards of other countries that are not the same as ours.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing people don't realize. Like, I was born in 78. I heard I was listening to somebody yesterday online and talking about how, like, we're, one of that last group that, like, lived outside all the time, and we talk about that, like, oh, when we were kids, we played outside all the time. We literally, like, would show up for dinner. Our parents wouldn't know where we were for like a day. I was telling my nephew that I was like, yeah, we were just running around out there in South Tulsa, and, if we were thirsty, whatever house we were at, we knew there was a water hose. We'd find the water hose, we hook it up, we get some water, we just drank it out of that. And he looked at me like I was like, you drink water out of that? I was like, well, I'm healthier than you all are.
I grew up in West Virginia. I grew up in West Virginia, so I exactly have that same thing. You go and build a fort and come back when the sun goes down.
A lot of people did. We ate at McDonald's. We ate pizza all the time. I mean, we ate pizza all the time. We did a lot of these things, and it's just something that, like, you see now. It's kind of funny. I was telling somebody this week, I was like, I was like, when I was a kid, people my age can remember, like when we were on airplanes, like people smoked on the airplanes.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny. We laugh about it now. We're like, oh, they have like a smoking section. It's like you're in a small little confined tube. There is no smoking section on an airplane. It was all, and then
it was full meals on the airplane. It wasn't shelf-stable, preservative-based products. Yeah,
full meals and stuff. Yeah. And when you went to a restaurant, it was standard when you went into a restaurant before they'd seat you, they'd ask you smoking or non-smoking. So there was 2 different sections there, but we lived in a society where like smoking was very normalized up until about the mid 80s. And you saw it everywhere. You saw it in buildings, in places. You're around it all the time. And we were told we have to stop doing this because it's killing everyone. But the reality was you look at it and you're like, it might be bad for us, but what we have now is worse, because we didn't have this level of very high obesity, this morbid obesity epidemic we have. We didn't have just rampant diabetes, especially in children, and we didn't have. It just seems like nowadays everybody, it's just standard practice. It's amazing. Like my parents are like, they get surprised, like, oh, so-and-so just got diagnosed with cancer. And I'm like, Mom, you all are all going to get, have you not noticed you're all getting cancer? But that when people were that age 40 years ago, they weren't all getting cancer. It still happened and stuff, but the acceleration and all the other health issues that we have now, it seems so much greater than the smoking that we had in there. But it was funny. Yeah. The smoking companies, the cigarette, they shifted their energy and focus. They shifted a lot of their staff, that the ones that were working in the labs to make smoking addictive. They shifted that technology and that wisdom they had from the staff into developing food that we would want to eat more and more and more. And so it makes you wonder, like, is there a reason I can't put that box of crackers down? I can't put those cookies down. I can't put, like, there's the food you taste now. It is really good. It tastes, and it's like you don't want to stop eating it. And you kind of look and you're like, well, you're not stopping eating it. Like it sells really, really well.
And I think my dad and I just a couple of weeks ago were joking around because he always has been my whole life was the old adage of breakfast is the most important meal of the day.
Yeah.
And I laugh every time. And I actually told him the other week about that. I said, you understand that was Winston-Salem or one of those companies that created that ad. And that thing drilled into your head over the late 80s and early 90s to where we thought it was a nutritional guidance. And it is. Breakfast is important, whatever. But the drill in was to grab that cereal box, put that sugar cereal in that bowl right before the day so that you get that dopamine hit as soon as you wake up. And then that dopamine hit rides you throughout the rest of the day and you start craving other sugary substances and stuff. And I'm going to be sarcastic, but also serious. From a business standpoint, what a genius way to get your customer with their cup of coffee in the morning,
Well, that's the key. You brought up the key word coffee. I was thinking about that the other day. So what we call coffee now is not what they called coffee like 50, 60 years ago. Like 60 years ago, it was black coffee. And now people are like, oh, I love coffee. It's huge with teenagers and stuff. You got and they're like, but then you look at what they're actually drinking. They're not drinking coffee.
Yeah.
They're picking something up at a drive-through, one of these, that seem to pop up every 2 weeks in your town and stuff. And it's got some remnants of coffee in there. Like there's something related to the coffee being in there, but it's mixed in with so many sugars and so many different syrups and so many other things. And so what they're really liking is the sugar, and their body is becoming very dependent on that part of it. And that's what and so it's like, if we could just get them all black coffee every morning, that would be a lot better for them than these sugar drinks that are just being, covered in the idea of coffee. And they walk around and think, I'm drinking coffee. And it's like, no, you're literally drinking a cup of liquid sugar.
And it's amazing too. Like, I get a kick out of it, but it's through that discernment of reading labels and stuff. It's like even when I was a kid, we didn't have to promote the protein because the protein was there.
Yeah.
And now it's like we have to infuse protein because we're just doing these baseless substances, and we're infusing lab generated protein in order to get things to a certain way that it fits into the nutrition table. And I think those are the certain things that people need to realize is, it goes back to, I'm losing the movie in the late 70s or so where it was the pill where everybody just took a pill every day and that was their nutritional supplement.
Uh-huh.
What was it? Where the movie where they had the dumpster that drove around and it churned up the human beings and turned them into these. It started with an S. It'll come. I'll put in post production. I'll throw the label up there.
Okay.
But anyway, I want to talk a little bit. I'll get off that track there for a sec. But kind of going back to, you're in the candy and chocolate business.
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit about, outside of the health and wellness. Let's talk a little bit about like ethical sustainment practices. Like speaking of coffee, for example, too. The coffee industry has seen different aspects where, it's the supply chain might not have its most reputable, people working in it and processes and procedures.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen that as a shift where customers are coming in asking for sustainable practices and ethical sourcing and stuff like that?
I get a little bit of that, but not much really on that. I know, when we're talking about you're wanting to hear keywords from customers like fair trade. I'm not really getting that as much. And stuff. And I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of, if you go to like a Whole Foods, a lot of that's going to be marked fair trade and stuff. Our biggest issue now is cacao is a hard crop to grow. And so, the cost, whenever, what we do here, a lot of people mentioning the cost of cacao being good because they hear that on the news and stuff. So the commodity itself has gone up a lot because from my, understanding, it's really, they're having trouble. They've had a number of bad crops in a row. And they do have trouble finding a little bit of workers. Most people don't know that most of it's grown in West Africa now instead of the Americas where it was discovered. But I don't get as much of the fair trade and stuff. It really is, it's so heavy on health. And I think really everybody took a time out to think about their health, 4 or 5 years ago. And that's why it's become so heavy. I think I probably even had more fair trade conversations just as many 10 years ago as I have now.
I would agree the same across my experience with other industry as well, as far as that goes. I think that was, it exists, like you said, in certain markets, Whole Foods, Wegmans, things like that.
Yeah.
I guess that's a good transition though, is going back to organic and vegan and sugar-free. Let's take those three categories. What do you think as far as a retailer, and you're talking to your distributors and those small manufacturers that are artisan crafts and artisan candies and things like that? Let's talk a little bit about how challenging that can be as far as they go to, let's say, produce a mass market product that feeds the masses and pays the bill and keeps the lights on. But we're all running a business. We have to understand that producing organic, vegan, and sugar-free, that's an added step. And sometimes it's a higher cost. Therefore, it's a higher cost to you. And therefore, it's a higher cost to the consumer. Let's talk a little bit about that challenge of the smaller brands sometimes can't compete in both worlds. And sometimes they have to choose one or the other.
The challenge is, if you're a retailer in my position, when I'm going to markets or I'm running across different companies, sometimes I'll even have a customer bring up a certain, kind of small confectioner that makes something that fits one of those different categories you just mentioned. But the challenge a lot of times is if their product is a lot more expensive and I'm putting it on the shelf competing with other chocolates and other confections that are half as much maybe as far as what I can retail them for, they're 99% of customers are still they're going to still choose the cheaper option. And so that segment of the population that is willing to kind of pay whatever it costs to get everything they want, to check all those different boxes, it's a really small group.
And it's probably even smaller given your demographics. It's very small.
Yeah.
And it might be in, let's say, West Coast or an East Coast city or something like that. It might be higher, but it's still not a majority defining factor.
No, it's one of those ones where there's certain high end. I mean, I'm thinking of certain shopping centers, like even like a Highland Village in Dallas, something like that. You can sell some of those there, and I appreciate those, and I want to carry them in my store, but I know they can't compete. When I'm selling chocolate out of my cage for $30 a pound, and if you do the numbers, those specialized ones are selling for 50 or 60. It just can't compete. So while I love them, I don't bring them in. I brought in like a second caramel maker last week. Valentine's week was the first time I had them in. Like our main chocolate partner out of Minnesota has been making a lot of caramels. They're really well made. We've been selling those for like $1 each. But this new one I went ahead and brought in because they have some unique flavors like black lava, sea salt, and a single malt scotch, and different really, kind of nice small batch caramels. And it was going to come out to like $1.10 per caramel in a 5-pack, or $1.20 per caramel, $1.25 per caramel in their larger tubes, where you get about 18, 19 of them and stuff. And so I was like, that's close enough. That's only if you can bring something in, if you're making things, if the packaging's really nice, like the packaging on this new caramel partner is, it looks like it's made for gifting. It looks high end. It has some unique flavors that you just don't find everywhere. And then the other nice selling point we've used a lot is they don't use any corn syrup in their caramel, which you can't find that anywhere else. Everything we used to, I used to make caramel apples. Everything has corn syrup in it and stuff. So that's one we brought in. But again, 10 to 25% more expensive than my standard caramels that I've been selling for years. So that's where you have to be if you're making the product and you want to get more wide distribution. You have to figure out a way to get your price at that point. I'm actually pretty impressed their prices are at that point. When I first saw them, at one of the markets, I figured they would be double, and they're not. They're only 10 or 20% more, 25% more. But yeah, if you're making stuff, you've got to figure out how to do that. And there's ways to do it. I mean, you just have to be more efficient with everything you do.
I think there was a blend too. And speaking just in the beer world, when I was in the planning meeting with different breweries as they were starting out, I think there's two ways, and this is not everybody, but there was a good trend where I think the companies took advantage of the profit opportunities that existed. And I think, just to be very frank, I mean, I sat in those meetings and I heard it. It's not me reading a book and telling you somebody else said it, but it's like one of those things where when you really drill it down, and I've worked with other brands that weren't worried about profit and they're worried about making volume and impact. Those brands that were worried about making volume and impact to help other people make a product more accessible, they found those ways. They found ways to cut costs and not cut corners on quality, but just make things more efficient. And I think that's the recognition I think as a consumers need to realize too, is there were also nefarious organic and vegan free, and those nefarious ones in the sense that they were taking advantage of the fact that there was more disposable income in that consumer profile. Therefore, they were willing to pay a higher price. And sometimes they would have, let's say, a more inflated margin to activate that. And they'll tell you, oh, it was to offset marketing, to offset volume and things like that. But there was also in certain brands a demand, which honestly perverted the end consumer's perception of what existed. And I think that's what upsets me the most is when I believe in the free market and I believe in capitalism, but the manipulation is where I draw the line. And it's like, you don't have to do things 2x the price. You could do it at 10 to 25% more and still make your money. So that's my personal opinion on some of that stuff. Yeah.
Well, no, it's important to know. And so you have to look at things and go, well, why, drill into these companies and go, why are you that expensive? And you have to figure out, okay, well, you have like 2 people you're paying for your accounting, to help accounting and billing. It's like, could we literally shift all that to some kind of, automated system or something easier and stuff. I've noticed this with the toy vendors in our toy side. All my new toy vendors that are kind of like brand new on the market, where they only have like a couple games or 1 or 2 new products, so they're just kind of just getting started. 100% of them have a Shopify site, and they're using that for ordering, for their customer ordering, and for the B2B ordering and stuff. And so it again, what that's doing is it's taking staff and labor out of there. So it's like, if you're making confections and you don't have to do anything as far as cutting the corners on what you make, but it's all the other parts of the business that you have to learn how to be efficient on. And you can't just do it the same way that people did everything 30 years ago and stuff. Because you can use less sales staff, use less back office, financing, accounting, all that other stuff. And then sometimes it's just tweaking the packaging. If there's two different ways to do the packaging and one of them is 25% less, then just take that to people and say, does this really, affect it that much? Because that stuff does make a difference.
Absolutely. Do you see like any age trends yet from your experience? Like, is it a lot of these types of questions and these hurdles that might come up? Are they typically like Gen Z, millennial, boomers? I know the older demographic is obviously sugar conscious and things like that when you get above boomer and stuff, but are you seeing any trends as far as demos, or is it just humans as a whole are just asking a lot more questions?
It's interesting. So the food allergies are definitely way more prominent with children, teens, younger people. That started to float into like the 20s, people that are in the 20s and 30s, and everything. So when it comes to the just wanting to avoid sugar in general, we're getting way more, definitely notice a huge trend of way more parents that are just trying to eliminate or minimize the amount of sugar that they give their kids, and stuff. So that's been a huge trend. We hear it from the parents, and then we also hear it from the grandparents that are wanting to get something for the grandkids, but they're at the same time going, the parents don't let them have sugar. Literally, the parents don't let them have sugar is a phrase we hear from our grandparents every single day in our store. And then close to the sugar is the artificial food dyes. And so sometimes it's just red 40, but honestly, I'm getting a lot more now where it's all of them and stuff. So I know we're actually going to bring in, we use Albany's for all our gummies. They've got a new all natural dye option that they've packaged up there. We use Hammond's for all of our lollipops and so on the lollipops, they've got an organic one they've made for years, natural food dyes that we're going to bring in, so that we've got two things, but that won't eliminate the sugar. And so that sugar issue is still going to be there, and stuff. So we're noticing way more there. But then in those people that are like in their 20s and 30s, some of those Gen Zers and those millennials, those are the ones that have a lot of food allergies. Sometimes you hear it directly from them, but a lot of times you hear it from their parents or grandparents that are shopping for them, wanting to get them a gift, wanting to pick, chocolates out of the case. So, for 10 years ago, you heard gluten, but you really never heard dairy, soy, or corn. Now you're hearing those three a lot more. Dairy's probably still number 2. Soy has really jumped up there, though. I've really heard that a lot more. And there's a soy product even in chocolate. And so they're having to, so it really is interesting there to where those kids that I think had allergies like when they were younger, they're not growing out of them anymore. And you realize now, like, these are things they're going to have for life unless something changes. And everything. So that's why I keep seeing the trends moving forward and forward. The older group, we have sugar-free chocolates for that older group. They're designed for diabetics, pre-diabetics. And they do a pretty good job of going to that if they're supposed to, but they also are the ones that cheat the most. And I think a lot of it is because they, the diagnosis of diabetes came on very late in life. And they've lived most of their life eating sugar, and it's just a hard habit to break. And while we have a really good sugar-free product, there are some really bad sugar-free products out there that if somebody gets hold of one of those, it does a trick to your mind where you think it must all be this bad. And so I'm not going to go back to it. But the least disciplined of people when it comes to what they should eat, allergies, all the things, is still that boomer group. That boomer group is still the least disciplined. But yeah, it's just amazing with the younger ones with some of those different issues there that they're either not growing out of, or they're becoming more aware that that's why they don't feel good every day. And if they eliminate that from their diet, they'll feel a lot better.
It's funny you brought up the older generation with the sugar free. Like my mom's father was diabetic, born diabetic, and then genetically passed it down to my aunt and my uncle. My aunt and my uncle have since passed due to diabetic complications.
Yeah.
My grandfather still is is still alive and thriving, and I don't think he'll ever die. But at the same, and he'll laugh if he ever hears that, because I say it to him a lot. But one of the funny stories is what you just said about the taste. I remember as a kid at their house, at my grandparents' house, it was my grandfather. There was a basket of regular candy that was like off to the side and away. And that was, I guess, where he would like dip in every once in a while. And it was always the bite-sized stuff. It was never the whole thing. And looking back as an adult now, I'm like, he was regulating himself by not buying the full bar and only buying the fun-sized stuff. So he would like every once in a while grab one. But I never forget. I would always forget going in, but I never forget the feeling of going in the wrong bowl and grabbing the sugar-free candies and just immediately spitting it out in my hand. And one of those things is now it's a whole different ball game. I mean, there are a lot of great, amazing sugar-free products out there, but you're right. There was a time where there was no good sugar-free products out there.
and there really wasn't. Remember, even when we still get that from people a lot. So we actually have like an edible cookie dough bar in our store. We have like a refrigerated case with like 6 big buckets. Looks like ice cream. Everyone thinks ice cream when they first walk in. We're like, it's edible cookie dough and stuff. So we actually have a gluten-free option, or one of our chocolate chip flavors gluten-free that our partner makes for us, and stuff. And a lot of people, they look at that one at first, they're like, oh yeah, I want to sample that one, and then they see it says gluten-free. They're like, oh, we're like, it's our best-selling one, and so we're like, okay, and so it literally is our best-selling, and so there's really good gluten-free options out there now, but there's still a kind of a mental block for a lot of people that if it's gluten-free, it can't be as good. And it's like, no, it can be as good and stuff. Like my nephew has an egg allergy. So we've, for years now, he's just about turned 12. We've, if we're having like cookies or cupcakes or muffins, things like that over there, his mom is making it without eggs. And she's a lot of times substituting applesauce in it. I think they're the best cupcakes I ever had. I love them.
I love that you said that. I had that at somebody's house where they were like, these are egg free because of their kid. And I was like, I actually might not use eggs in my cupcakes anymore. I like that applesauce, that tang and that sweetness that it brought in was phenomenal.
And then really, really moist too, right?
Yeah. Like I was blown away where I was like, this is actually better than the original.
And so I love that idea, but I think the challenge is too, as we go forward, it's like, if there's things we can do with our wheat that we're growing to make it where everyone can eat again, then why don't we do that?
That's a great transition to work. Yeah.
This is going to be the challenge going forward, is that now we have a pretty large industry of gluten-free products that have built up that you're going to see on the store shelves, a lot of places where it used to be very niche. Now it's very easy to find that. And you're starting to see more other products out there that are avoiding the soy and the corn, and maybe some dairy free and stuff, because we've figured out how to milk oats and almonds and stuff. So yeah, that's one of those things that now we really have this whole other food industry, but we built this whole thing up with the idea of like, oh, well, because your body's rejecting the food we now produce, when we process differently than we used to, we have these other options for you, and stuff. Or sometimes, again, it just goes back to we become less healthy, but we've just kind of learned to live with it. Like, well, this is just the world we live in today. And don't worry, there's a pill you can take every day to help you with that, so you don't feel bad. There's other food options out there, and it's like, well, could we just go back to how the food we used to eat? So
I can't speak any high. Like, that's the craziest part is that, and let's just be honest about it. It's like, it's if we can go back to farming the way we farmed and get these large. Farming is not a scalable thing in a large sense. There is a market. There is a quality cap to farming. Mm-hmm. And I think we went past that because we worry. I mean, we're both capitalist people, but at the same time, there has to be some sort of a limit where your capitalism, go back to that libertarian belief, where if your freedom of building your business is affecting other people in a negative way, that's a deterrent from what it means to live in a free society. You're not living free if you're suppressing other people at the same time. Yes. Like, you can live within that cap, be happy with that cap, and then invest in another farm that has the same processes and another farm and scale your business horizontally as opposed to vertically, which then is just harming everybody. Because you're right, we have all these spin-off industries, and it's not a conspiracy theory. They exist because we refuse to address the core issue, which is the scale in which we're farming today.
That's the challenge. Yeah, like we've basically totally changed the way we grow and process food, the way we store food, and we've done everything different. And people just don't realize that. Again, it goes back to like we don't know. We've forgotten what the ingredient list on the cereal box looked like in the 70s. It's not the same today, and so we still see the cartoon character and the same graphics on the front. We assume it's the same stuff. It's like, that's not the same food you're eating then. And that goes for like all of our food, that it's not the same food because the graphics on the front and the logo is the same. And so there's a reason it's affecting you. But now the problem is like, there's money in it for people. It's solidified. It's solidified alternative industries now, like that aren't going to go away. Yeah. And my big thing is again, it's not if you come into my store and could shop in my store, but if I was telling someone just in general, like, retail in general had a hard year last year. People didn't have as much money. That's just the reality. If people have less money at the end of the day, then they're going to spend less money in your store. So if we could make people healthier, they wouldn't have to spend as much money on their health care. They wouldn't have to go and buy different ingredients and foods that are going to be a little more expensive because they are made differently. There's so many different things that could affect them. They wouldn't have to spend time dealing with all their health care issues. And so they would have more time to spend with us. And the stress. It's like the health insurance. They don't realize. They're like, well, I have health insurance. My company I work for pays for that. It's like, well, you're having to work longer so that you can retain that health insurance. Your company's having to spend money on that. That's money they can't pay you in salary. I remember the first job I ever had. I was working at a church in Springfield, Missouri, as the youth director. That was the first job I got, like, out of college. And so the way they structure the salaries for everybody on the staff is they had your base salary, and then they had a lump sum of money that went towards your health insurance that was provided through the church. And then whatever was left from that lump sum went to a savings account, a 401k. And this is how so many companies are structured, and people don't realize this. Well, because I was in my mid-20s, I was a young male and I was single, so I didn't have any dependents or, spouse or children like that. So they were spending by far less on my health insurance than everybody else on the staff. And they were putting all the rest of that. I think it was like $4,000 total every year or some number. I don't know what it was. I mean, this was years ago. And so I was getting like way more money put into my 401k every year than everybody else was. And so they're all sitting back going, this is so great that, the church pay after all my co-pays and my deductible, which I end up maxing out every year then the church takes care of all the rest of that. And I'm sitting over there going, the church is paying all this money in my 401k that I get to just take home and do whatever I want with and stuff. And so a lot of people don't realize, like, if we were all healthier, then the health insurance would go down.
A lot of people don't realize that a top 5 and sometimes top 2 expense for a business is the health insurance of their employees.
And there's some numbers that we spend like $5 trillion a year on health, on the health industry in this country. And like, if we could cut that down, then like that's money that just goes back into people's pockets that they can use to shop and enjoy things. Because I was telling someone, I said it was a tough year for retail last year. And I said, the biggest challenge is I can create the coolest store in the world. I can create this awesome candy shop, chocolate shop, toy store. You come in and you get to enjoy with your family. You're playing with toys. You're buying sweets. You're sampling edible cookie dough. If you don't have any money, you're not going to get in your car and come to my store. If you have money at the end of the day, you're going to come and do that. So does it benefit me for everybody to get healthy? It does. Because if everybody gets healthy, they will spend less on their health care, their insurance, their medications, their special foods. and they will spend that money and that time going out and enjoying their community. And it might be my store, it might be some other place, it might be a nice restaurant, it might be a vacation, but they'll get to enjoy things more. And that's what they want to do if they feel better. But they have to feel better. And you just see the direct correlation. It is the food we're eating. We're smoking less. We're drinking a lot less, actually. That's dramatically changed in the last 5 years and stuff. But the one thing that really is like changed is the food we eat. And you see that. That's the correlation. You just can't deny it.
It's interesting too. Like for a great example is the other day I saw this awesome video where these guys, I think they do a traveling podcast as well, but they do international. And one of the things was the guy brought a box of Fruit Loops from the United States, and then he went over to Europe and bought and went to the grocery store and he put the two boxes next to each other. And I was absolutely like, I've been traveling internationally every once in a while, but I never really did that side by side. And when they did that side by side, all the dyes in the United States were red dye, 7, 5, whatever else. Everything of the color of all the different Fruit Loops was made by a different dye. And the European version was the orange came from carrots, the red came from radishes. There was no
like a
lab
crazy
dye.
idea. Like
And it's one of those things where I think a lot of people, even to think of one beer, and I'm losing the name, and I'll come back to it in post production, but there's a beer that's a orange beer that's made in Germany, and then there's another version that's made in the United States. The one that's made in Germany, the color that makes the liquid orange as a beer, in there, it's a different name in the United States. We call it something else, but really it's a bug. And it's a bug that they crush up and they drain the dye out of the bug. And then that's the dye they use to color the beer in Germany. And that's the type of stuff we're talking about in this conversation is we have the resources. We don't need to go to labs to bring color into things. We don't need to go. We have natural resources that we produce, whether it's vegetables and produce or if it's insects. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people, cringe at the, chocolate covered crickets and all that stuff. But it's like, if that's a world,
we're not going into that yet. No.
I don't want to go down that path because I personally don't eat them or anything like that. But what I'm trying to say is, it's funny that we use those things, but in the United States, we're so afraid to like admit that beer that you love is made with bugs.
Yeah,
and it's like, but we don't call them bugs on our labeling. We call there's some name that they come up with it that doesn't correlate. But I guess what I'm trying to go back to is, the thought of like orange coloring in something can be produced with carrots. Like you can source it naturally. You don't have to throw all that extra stuff. With kind of where we're going with those dyes, I want to ask like two more questions before we close out. Is in the regulatory and industry shifts, have you seen anything as far as labeling and packaging from a regulatory standpoint? Are they requiring people to be more transparent, or are we seeing kind of the opposite where there's a little less transparency? I ask that because in my line of work in the alcohol industry, we're getting more regulations of which is valid, is that we weren't showing the caloric intake of craft beer. And so people were not realizing, they were thinking they were drinking, 100 calories or whatever, like a Miller Lite. And they didn't realize that milkshake triple IPA they were drinking was 300 or 400 calories. And I'm one of those that was selling it at scale. And I did not realize, like, if I drank a 6-pack a day, I was consuming my entire nutritional value just in the liquid before I even had a meal.
Well, that's what people don't realize. I've had for many years, people, it's so funny that all people come in the store still holding their, chocolate shake masquerading as coffee from Starbucks. And they're looking at the case, they're looking at me. I only weigh like 10 pounds more than I weighed in high school. And they're like, I'd weigh 400 pounds if I worked here. And it's like you're sitting there holding something that has
because you're going to consume 30
than all the chocolate you're going to pick out today. Like you will pick out less chocolate today than you're holding in that cup right now and stuff. And the ingredients in my chocolate, your body knows how to process better than the ingredients in that drink. But yeah, I haven't seen a lot more, and I want that. I think that truth in labeling is important when it helps people in the calorie count. The biggest shift we had was the actual calories on the menus that, again, if you're a local single store, you don't have to do that. It was only for, I think you had to have at least 40 locations.
Yeah, it was some scalable chain type thing. Yeah.
And but that made a difference. Like that was probably the last time I went and bought a cheesecake in the Cheesecake Factory. Honestly, I love that. That was like a little thing I would do, like just as a special treat, like when I was in Dallas and like that. And I'm like, that's a lot of numbers, like a lot of numbers and stuff. And so I kind of was like, can I live without that? Yeah. And so, you know, I do there's like an ice cream sandwich place down the street from there. I do instead and stuff because I know it's not 1,500 calories. And everything. So yeah, there hasn't been a lot of that. I hope there is more. I think what I think we're going to see though is I think I've seen a shift, especially in the last year, and I think that there's that whole movement. You know, Bobby Kennedy Jr., Nicole Shanahan, and the Make America Healthy Again kind of movement. People like Callie Means, those are the ones that brought a lot of it to the forefront with people that are more educated. And so there's way more education throughout the population, much higher percentage to where the consumers are going to demand it so much where people will start moving that way before the government has to regulate it. But it will come to where truth in labeling, and we're going to be much more aware as a population that, there are certain foods I'm buying on the shelf here in my grocery store that are not allowed to be sold in Europe. And that should be like a really big red flag. And it is for a lot of people. Or, you know, there's certain countries that won't buy our wheat. Why won't they buy our wheat? And so that whole, like, why is this going on? And it's going to force people to do things. The new one I mentioned the other day is Steak and Shake. You know, so they're going to start cooking their fries the way McDonald's cooked their fries in 1980. And stuff. And so that's changing, and they're getting tens of millions of dollars of free publicity online by doing that. And they're going to create a lot of loyalty. So there will be regulation, I think, with the new administration. And so if you're making food and producing food, the best thing you should do is you're going to have to do it. You can kick and scream all the way there probably, but the reality is the population is moving them that way. It's not because a handful of people want to move the country that way. The population is behind that. They want it moving that way. My interaction with customers at our counter in the last 6 months, every one of my customers that mentions food allergies all think that Bobby Kennedy Jr. is a saint. They all come from all different angles of life, but what it is they don't care if there's a D or R next to your name. They don't care what your politics are. They just know they don't feel good and their family doesn't feel good and their friends don't feel good. And they want to stop that. They want to feel better again. You know, I mean, there's times like, you know, if you ever really sick, like when you get the flu really bad, there's always that point for like 2 or 3 hours where you're just like, somebody find me a gun and stuff. And you realize like how bad you feel in that moment where you're like, I don't want to feel like this anymore. And so a lot of the food allergies aren't getting to the people at that point where they've got 101 degree temperature and the flu and they're just in the midst of it, but they don't feel good. And it sucks to not feel good. And so that's coming. If I was making food, I would shift now. If I was making potato chips, I would completely eliminate seed oils and do that. All you have to do is put it on social media. You don't have to spend money advertising on a network, and you will develop a loyalty of customers that will last you for 20 years and stuff. If you just go ahead and move along at the pace of regulations and the pace of everyone else, and you're one of the last ones to the party, you will have no loyalty from customers for it and stuff. You might still have some, but you're going to lose customers because some of those customers you have will start to move to these other vendors that are going to provide what they want in their food and stuff. And I think they're probably willing to pay 10 to 20% more too. I think there's a willingness to pay a little bit more too, not to pay twice as much or even 50% much, but that's the gist I get from talking with customers at the counter. And again, that's one of the benefits of being a retailer. You get to talk to the end consumer. Most executives at food manufacturers, if they are talking to end consumers, it's in somewhat controlled settings, like a focus group and stuff. You really need to actually stand behind the counter. You can't look like a food executive. You need to look like somebody that's making $13 an hour working at a counter selling food. And if you're that person, people will open up with you and tell you what they really think. And
I love that.
I'm amazed there haven't been more companies in the last few months that have just come out and said, yes, we're getting rid of that. We're only going to make our European version of this food and stuff. Because if they do that, like, again, there's that customer loyalty that they'll develop for a long time. Like, it actually, I think it's good for the pocketbook. If that's their only motivation, then I'm going to put it out there, because I think that, you know, if they don't care about making people healthy, then that's fine. But I think actually can make their pocketbooks better.
I fully agree with you. I think I've been a big advocate of the show Undercover Boss.
Yes.
As much as it's like made up reality show, stuff like that, the core principle of it is something every single owner, executive, anybody that is detached from the consumer with multiple layers between them, that should be an annual practice, and not go around the mustache and nobody knows who you are, but get on the floor, spend a couple hours behind the register of the business or of your retail partners, and learn directly from your consumers. So I love that you said that. And I'm going to use that. That might even be the title of this episode, is Truth in Labeling, because I love that phrase you used.
Well, it's so funny. It's the bigger these companies, and people don't realize how big a lot of these food companies are, where everything has become a lot more consolidated. Farming has become more consolidated. The people at the executive level, there really is a massive disconnect with them and everyone else, and stuff. And these things just don't affect them, and their daily life. And so you just never know about it. And some people do know. I would love to see what some of these executives at these companies that, you know, are living in $10 million homes, and they go to country clubs, and they've got resorts. They don't really interact with the 99% at all. I'd love to see what their actual diets are. I'd love to see what they can eat. They can afford private chefs and things like that. I'd love to see what they eat. You know, I mean, I remember hearing years ago that in Silicon Valley, like the most exclusive, like K through 12 school in Silicon Valley does not allow the kids to use computers.
Well, and that's that part right there. That's a whole nother episode we could dive into, because there's a great breakdown where it's like, what was it? Tim Cook and those guys, they didn't let their kids have iPads when they were children. Yeah. You know, Zuckerberg already said, he's like, my kids aren't going to be on social media. It's like, it's almost like it's back to the notorious BIG, never get high on your own supply. You know what I mean? Where it's like, but if you're not willing to get high on your own supply, what the hell are you selling to everybody else?
Yes. And that's the thing. There's certain things, like I don't do freeze-dried candy in my store. So I love selling candies and chocolates and stuff like that. But I look at freeze-dried candy and I'm like, good Lord, the only thing that isn't sugar we sucked out of there. Like, you're just eating pure processed sugar and food dyes. Like, you can't tell me that freeze-dried candy is not one of the worst things that we ever came up with. You can't convince me of that.
And it's going crazy online too. There's Skittles and all that.
It is very popular. I get phone calls every week about it and stuff. And so again, it's one of those things that I think the executives, they know what they're feeding everyone. It's an easy, quick way to make money. Like, could I change everything, and would it possibly make me more money to build a huge brand loyalty because we switched to a healthier option? Yes, it could, but they had the fear of like that unknown too. They're just as scared as anyone else about stepping out and doing something different. It's just as scary for them as a small business owner. And so they're trying to make sure that every one of their quarterly reports look better than the last one, is what they're trying to do, for as long as they want to work there.
Yeah, you're exactly right. In closing, I'll ask a new question that has nothing to do with anything we talked about. So it's a new thing. I'm building a guest Spotify playlist. So in closing, 3 songs that you'd want played at your funeral.
Gosh. I don't know if it's a good funeral song, but I remember hearing that. I love the Battle Hymn of the Republic.
Very nice.
I think How Great They Are. I love that one. It's so good. God, there's a few new ones that we get to do at church that I love. I'm just trying to remember the names of them. So I'm not good with names and the musicians and stuff like that. But music is so good. Like, there's just like literally we were made to hear music and stuff. I don't know how long music's been around, but like there's a soothingness to the soul to just and you need that. I mean, so much of, we're talking about food, but so much of how our health and well-being every day is tied into just like an emotional, like, do we feel good, you know? And I mean, like, we got snow on the ground here today, but the sun is out. I'm just at least glad the sun is out and stuff, because it just changes how you feel. So we can improve our food quite a bit and to make ourselves healthier, but there's things like music, there's things like community and physical human interaction that we have to have too, because if we don't have those, we'll still never, you know, get back to where we should be, where we were 50, 60 years ago.
I completely agree with you, Ryan. Thank you so much for taking the time today. This was really exciting, like to be able to have a conversation with you about what you do, about your passion. And I want everybody to understand, down in the links, you see everything out there. If you're out, check out the website. Also, if you're going through Oklahoma, stop in and say hi to Ryan and let him know you enjoyed the talk.
Thank you, Nate.
Hey, you take care. You have a good rest of your day, buddy.
Thanks, sir.